Okay, so good day. Welcome to Module 7, guys. In this module, we will be covering two important concepts in programming functions in recursions. So also we will learn how to define and use the function to make our code more organized and reusable. Okay, so we also explore the concept of recursion where the function calls itself to solve a problem. Okay, so here are our objectives. Okay, so our objective is to define what is computer programming, explain related computer programming such as source code, etc. Um, we also understand the different user-defined and predefined functions, differentiate between the value and the preference parameters, understand the concept of recursions and how to write a recursion function. Okay, so let's start with the overview of the function. When we see function, it's a block of a code, no, that performs a specific task. Okay, so to perform this, these functions are essential, no, for breaking down complex problems into smaller ones para maging manageable parts siya. So it also allow us to reuse the code and make our programs more efficient and easier to maintain. Okay? So ito talaga yung pinaka main purpose of using functions, no? So from the big part of the program, you have to chunk, no? So you have to put a functions so that if you want to reuse it or to maintain it, it's easily to locate, no? It's easily to track the code or easily to debug. Okay, so the C++ for us provide a lot of library. For example, the different predefined functions that we can use sa ating program. So itong functions na to are already written, no, and already tested also. Okay, so we don't have to worry because about the implementation details. Some of the common examples include mathematical functions, like for example a square root. Okay, so for the square root and the power functions, we can calculate powers as well as the input and output functions by, like for example, C out and C in. So we can use mathematical library or math, for example, IO stream. Okay, so that these functions will be applicable, no, for our code. Okay, so later, guys, I will give you a demo of different function problems. Okay, so the function, the advantage of the function are easier to maintain. We can also easy to update and also debug with a very long program, one very long program. Okay, so in addition with the predefined functions, that we can also create our own functions, no. So that is user-defined function. Ito yung tinatawag nating user-defined function. So this will allow us to create a customized logic for our specific problem or needs. So the user-defined function, there are two parts: the function's declaration and prototype of the function's definitions. Okay, so we have a user-defined function. See, okay, ang user-defined functions, by the way, ito yung function declarations or a type of a prototype that the computer tells the compiler tells the compiler about this function name and it return or which is the return type and the parameters. Okay, So it's like a blueprint of the functions. Okay? So the general syntax of the return type are the function name or the parameter list. Okay? So ano po yung parameter list? Ito po yung mga keywords or tokens or a variable inside the parentheses of the functions. Okay? So for example, we have int add functions, and we have two integers inside the parameter, which is the integer a and integer b. So these two integers declares a function name. Ano yung function natin? We have function name add, for example. Ayan. So let's try to okay, let's see. Draw. So for example, you have a function which is int. Okay, and int is the data type. The next we have the function name, which is add. Okay, so for example, int add, and then we will create a parameter. For example, int also, int a and int b. Okay, so ayan. So ito guys, ito yung tinatawag nating user defined functions. Okay, so for example of this int add, and the parameter is int a and b. So meaning we declare a function which is the name add, and we create two integers as our input para it returns to our integers. Okay, so ito yung ibig sabihin ng user defined functions. Okay, so ito yung function definitions na we can write the actual code and the functions that we can execute it. So ang predefined function, our user defined function, it's consist with the function header, it's similar with the declaration, and the function body which contains our code. Okay, so ayan po example. A good example is this. So we have the return type or data type, and the function name, which is the function, the name of our function, then the parameter list, then what are the instructions inside this block of code, the functionality. Okay, no? So let's discuss about these different keywords. If ang function natin returns a value, and the type of the value must be must be specified, no? So when we specify it, it will return type. Okay, doon sa return type yung ipapasa yung value, no, based doon sa ating code. So for the moment, that could be integer or a float or a character. If the function does not return the value, so yung ating return type must be also void. Okay, and our function name follow the same rules, no, of a composition as identifiers. So magiging function, ang parameter list natin, ito yung formal parameters that our functions together with the data types or the return types. Okay, so not all functions actually need a return value, no? Meron din function does not contain return value. For example, ang functions are often used to perform actions, like for example, printing output sa screen. So hindi naman siya nagre-return, di ba? Ayan, so that's a good example. Okay, So what do we mean value returning function? Meaning, this term, we can put a value, it returns the functions, or in the other hand, we can do a return value. So itong return value na statement is used to specify that the value of our functions will return, no? So our data type now of the return value must match the functions that declared in the return type. Okay, understand, guys? Okay, so if you have questions, just message me, ha, in order for you to understand. So okay, so when we say return type, it's a statement serve as a two purpose. One, it terminates our execution sa ating function. Second, it return the value of calling the code. Okay? So, itong functions, it can be multiple return statements or might be only one, no? Can be executed. Okay? Ayan. So now, here are the example. When we working with the functions, it is important for us to understand first the difference between the formal and the actual parameters. So when we say formal parameters, ito yung mga variables na dineclare natin doon sa function parameter list. Okay? So when we say the actual parameter, ito yung mga values that are passing all to the functions. Ito yung tinatawag nating pass to the functions when kung tatawagin na siya. Okay? Okay. So, here a good example of using a user-defined functions. Yan. So, in these functions, we calculate the sum and we will return the answer. Then, ipapasa dun na sa int answer, no? Na placeholder. Okay? So, ang default natin sa C++, it uses pass by value parameters for parameters. Meaning, ikukopya lang niya yung actual parameter na value na ipapasa doon sa function. Any changes to be a formal parameter inside the function, it will not affect the original actual parameter. Okay? So, when we say reference parameter, itong reference parameter, if we want a function to be able to modify the original value sa ating actual parameter, we can use the pass by reference. Okay, so kanina we have a pass by value parameters, and next we have to pass our value by references. So how do we do this? By adding an ampersand na sign after the data type and the formal parameter declarations. Now, we can use the formal parameter functions. It becomes now an alias of the actual parameters. Okay? So, in any changes can be made and it will be also affect with the original variable. Okay? Ayan. So, let's take a look for the example that demonstrate the difference between to check the values reference parameters. So in this code, we can have a function that swaps the values of two parameters, and we will use how using using the reference parameters to an essential that is essential for our operations. So let's try, let's try to have a simple code, a rectangle. So a rectangle here demonstrate basic user-defined functions that we can calculate the area of the functions. Okay, so let's try. Okay, so for example, ampersand okay, using namespace std, and then So we will um, create a declaration for a function. For example, if we will compute an area, for example, what would be the data type if our value must be is a data with decimal values or decimal places. So we can use a data type using double. Okay. So since we will compute an area, so we create a function area name, no? And then inside the parameters, so let's take a look here. Inside the parameters, we have to insert the variables which using double double data type. Okay? So in double data type, meron tayong in computing our area sa square, our rectangle, we have the length and double width. Okay? For example, ito. So meron tayong variable sa dalawa, no? Dalawang variable. Now, we will now create our main program. So of course, in main, okay, in main. So first, we will declare first a variable. Double, we have the L, the width, and the area. Okay, semicolon. So now, let's try to assign input. For example, cout, enter the length of the rectangle. Enter the length, okay, of the rectangle. Okay, so next, okay, okay. So we will assign the second input to W. And now, we will use now the function call. So, for example, our function call is an area is equals to what? Is equals to an area. So, yung function prototype natin, yung L, okay, so we have the area L and the width, and then after that we will print the value. So see out so the area of the rectangle is okay. Then return 0. Okay, so now we have already created our function call. So since this is user defined functions, we there are three parts here, guys. First, we have to declare first our function. Second, we have to implement first by using function call. Lastly, we have to define our functions based on the formula of computing our rectangle. Okay, so now we have double and area. Wait lang. Double area. Then we have double So let's try to compile it. Okay. Okay, let's run this program. Okay, enter the area of the rectangle, the width. Alright, so simple. Okay. Okay, so naintindihan? So in our example, that shows our declared functions, no, before sa main program, and our function definition is after the main program, and also we demonstrate how function that is called and how it returns a value. Okay, so meron din tayong function overloading. Okay, so sa function overloading ay we can create multiple functions in the same name but it's different the parameters. So that is function overloading. Okay. Okay. So let's proceed. Okay, so that is example. Okay, we already done that. Okay. Okay. So we already done that. Okay. So ito yung ibig sabihin ng pass by reference. And ito yung reference ng pass by value. Okay. So let's move on to recursion. Okay. So I think that's all. Okay. Okay. Let's go to more recursive pala. Okay. Okay. Alright. Okay. So we are done with that. So let's move on to recursion. Okay. So now let's dive to the second major topic in our module, which is recursion. So a recursion is also a function that calls itself and it's known as a recursive function. Okay, so ito yung technique, no, that allows us to solve complex problem by breaking them down into smaller ones. Okay, so uh, ang recursive function or definition, no, is one of in which something is defined in terms of smaller versions of itself. For example, the power functions of x power of n, and it also can be also defined as x times x power of n minus 1. Okay? So ito yung classical examples ng recursive definitions. Okay? Okay, so ayan. So to write a recursive function, we need also two main components. Of course, we have the base case and the general or recursive case. Okay, take note ha. There are two main components ang recursive function. First, we have the base case, and the second one is the recursive case. So, ang base case, ito yung condition under which the recursion stops. Ito yung basihan kung hanggang saang part mag-stop yung recursion. Okay? So, it also provide us a direct or non-recursive solutions. Okay? So, the general case is where the function call itself with modified input. Okay, so it bringing the closures to the base case. Okay, so kung ando na sa base case, palapit na palapit sa base case while updating, so doon na mag-terminate ang looping. Okay, so in writing a recursive function, there are two main components, no? So let's consider the power function again. So, ang power function, we can write a recursive function to calculate the x power of n, and then the base case would be the n is equals to 1, in function returns our x, and return ang recursive case would be return the x multiplied the results of calling the power of function with the n minus 1. So, discrete math po tayo ngayon, ha? Okay, so an example of factorial function we have here. So ito yung recursive definitions. Okay, so in tracing the recursive function, it's helpful to trace the execution of the recursive function. So para ma-understand natin how it works, each time that the function calls itself and the new instance of the function is created with its own set of local variables. So the instances are pushed onto the tawag nating call stack, and in a base case naman, kailangan i-reach pa niya, no? So the function starts returning the value back to our chain. Okay? Ayan. So ayan, we have two cases. Yan. Okay, so I think that's it. Okay, so if you have questions, just ask questions. Okay, so paano i-implement si recursive? Okay, compile and run. Enter non-negative. Okay, so the idea here, of course, we have function declaration. Okay, yeah, and then we have function prototypes. Okay, dito. We have the function declaration, which is factorial. Factorial is our function name, and our parameter is n. Okay, so the data type is integer. And now, the idea here is to compute the factorial. Okay, so ginamit natin yung updating dito sa ating main program, but we define our recursive function by adding another functions outside the main functions. Okay. Ayan. So here, mag-a-update po siya hanggang it reach the value na nearest to our n. Okay. So ito, yun lang kasimple, no? Kailangan may base case and minus 1 ito. Okay? So ayan guys.